call first for all teams. OG foodpanda.
Yeah, we're here.
OO coach. Oh, I see you putting in the speakers order in the chat already. All teams, please also speak in speaking order in the chat as well, because we're gonna have to choose final best speaker. CG MBS want to be part of the symphony.
We're here.
CEO killing the Ender Dragon between round.
Yeah, we're here.
All right. All right, cool. To my panel, really sorry if I pronounced your names like wrong. Atiyab.
Hello, President. Hello, Atiyab panel
Alright.
for this round. Good luck for the debate.
All right. Chryztian.
You're here. Best of luck, guys.
Ella.
Here, best of luck, guys.
Saleem, Salisu.
Here, Mr. Frank.
All right, cool. So hello everyone, my name is Pham. I'm gonna be the chair of this round. Pronounced gonna be he, him, but I suggest you guys to refer to the panel as a whole instead of just me. Judging me with the wonderful panel that we have just introduced. Just a few stuff. First of all, congratulations to making the grand final. Second of all, before your speech, please state your preferred pronouns if you have any. If the speakers say they have no preference or they don't state any preference, you're gonna assume that they're gonna use gender neutral pronouns, i.e. they, them, the speaking order, or the name. Second of all, please also state your POI preference. If the speaker does not include their does not say the POI preference out, we're gonna be assuming that they're gonna take POI in any forms. So the speakers, the other speakers are welcome to just put it in chat or unmute yourself to the speaker accept your POI. Okay, so with the motion about the memory erasure technology, now that's it. I welcome the Prime Minister to start this debate. Here.
Okay, am I both audible and visible? Okay, thank you. My pronouns are he, him, and I'll be taking POIs verbally only. I won't be checking the chat. And I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. For far too long, people have been living in a world where they're forced to live in the shadow of their most painful memories. But now what we want inside government is to have them have the freedom to move forward and live much more fulfilling lives. For these reasons, we propose. In my speech, I'll be doing a few things. First, going over a few points of setup. Secondly, giving you 2 substantives, the first on the principle of autonomy and the second on moving forward from trauma. Okay, on to setup then. The first point I want to discuss is how does this memory erasure technology actually work? From the info side, we decided that it's by wiping away targeted memories from someone, presumably stitching back the events in a sensible manner, means that the gaps in their memory will have something else replacing it, or is stitched together in a way that makes sense to them. Secondly, then, how can people actually get this memory erasure technology? First, we think that we require on government for them to go to a therapist and try to recuperate from this past trauma using more traditional methods. If after 10 or so sessions, the therapist concludes that there's no significant progress is being made with the patient's mental health, they provide this procedure as an option for the patient to opt into. Note that this procedure will not be very common, so patients won't have much prior knowledge of it until the therapist provides it as an option. Then, if the patient chooses to opt in, they go to a hospital with a licensed ability to execute the procedure, and the license includes training in the ethical practices of the technology, and they're also able to evaluate when it becomes excessively used. This is not just going to be a procedure that's done willy-nilly. The doctors and therapists have to agree to this before it happens. Okay, thirdly then, who has access to this memory erasure technology? We think that this is available to those who want it and can be accessed through licensed medical professionals and ensuring that there's safeguards against misuse. We think that some things that it might be used for is for trauma victims, people dealing with severe grief, or cases of intrusive or debilitating memories that prevent their normal functioning. Note that these medical professionals choose their careers in good faith. They want to help people, so they're unlikely to abuse this technology. There are also many checks and balances to ensure this, i.e. the threat of revoking their medical license and ruining their livelihood if abused. Lastly then, on the burden, opposition has to prove to us why the benefits on mental health that we on Gov push will not manifest and why this technology itself is so harmful. On to my first substantive then on the principle of autonomy. Firstly, then, 3 things on this. Firstly, we think that we provide better control over their personal memories, right? Because memory erasure allows people to choose which memories to keep and which to forget, giving them direct control over their emotional experience. This choice is crucial for those who painful memories severely hinder their lives, such as trauma or those experiencing intense grief. Secondly, then, we think that it extends their medical autonomy because they get a larger variety of choice as to how they want to approach to solving their therapies, right? Just like how individuals can choose medical procedures like surgeries or therapies, we think that memory erasure extends this autonomy to mental health decisions. Thirdly, then, we also empower a more informed choice because it would be provided a regulated system with professional oversight, so they make informed decisions and make sure we support people who truly want to forget this painful memory. I'll take that POI. 3.
Right. If you look at the technology behind a wall of 10 therapy sessions, what is the actual chain of this technology? Because the only people that would opt in would be people who go to therapists anyway.
No, but the problem with this, what we're trying to solve is when there's, like how their traumatizing events continue to haunt patients, right? But we want to make sure that they're actually trying to solve this issue before opting into this. And so what we're actually helping is the patients who have these like memories that rise up over and over again and affect their daily lives and actually don't really want them, right? And so this is the demographic we're trying to help. Okay, lastly, on the impacts of this autonomy, right? We're actually respecting their personal freedom because we allow them to have a larger variety of choice. And secondly, we think that we actually have better psychological health through this increased autonomy because they're more empowered to make autonomous choices about their mental health, and they offer a greater sense of control and ownership over their lives. And this empowerment also improves their mental health because they feel more in control and have more choices to make in their lives. Secondly, then, on how we actually help patients better move on from trauma. Why does this actually happen on side governments? Firstly, then, 2 layers here. Firstly, we think that we have a targeted removal of these super traumatic memories, right? Because this technology enables individuals to erase specific traumatic memories without affecting other parts. And so a person, for example, could choose to forget the memory of a violent incident while retaining their overall life experiences. And this precision allows them to relieve the psychological burden of trauma without losing out on anything else that's important for their life, right? Secondly, then, we think this provides a much more immediate relief compared to the alternatives on side opposition. So like normally for them on their side house, their therapies will take many years. And although we acknowledge that there's some time between due to the required therapy sessions in our policy, we think that this immediate relief is still comparatively faster than what happens on side opposition, because we think that sources of major distress like PTSD is less likely to be triggered once these memories are indeed erased. And we think that in the long term, it's simply better for these patients. Well, then why can't this actually happen on side opposition? We think that the therapies they have access to is very slow and incomplete, right? Because it's a lengthy process and therapy and medication takes years and do not guarantee full recovery, right? And so with lingering effects like flashbacks or anxiety, these things often persist and affect the lives of these people going forwards, right? So it prevents them from fully moving past their past trauma. And so memory erasure then offers a quick targeted solution that isn't available in side opposition. Secondly, then, we also think that memories and triggers persist on their side of the house. Without this erasure, traumatic memories can be triggered by everyday events and dragging these individuals back into this distress. And lastly, then, we think that there's also a limited control over recovery on their side of the house because they have much less options for these patients to opt into. And sometimes patients don't want to continuously go to therapy after trying it, right? Because after trying, they might realize, oh, this is not the thing for me. But on their side of the house, they don't have any other options to turn towards. What are the impacts then? Firstly, we think we have better improved mental health outcomes on our side of the house because by removing the root cause of their distress, individuals are likely to experience significant improvements in their overall mental well-being. This can lead to reductions in depression, anxiety, and other things that might be harming their everyday lives, right? And we don't think this is only on personal well-being, but also for their social and professional lives, because once they're free from these memories, they're more likely to maintain stable relationships and perform better in careers. We also think there's a reduced burden on the healthcare system because these people don't have to be reliant on medication or be reliant on therapy for long amounts of time. And we think that this can turn focus onto other issues that can be solved by this technology. And lastly, we think this prevents the cycle of trauma where individuals remember the most distressing events and dump them towards people on later generations. So it creates a more resilient society without generational trauma. For these reasons, we're so proud to propose.
I think the speaker for the fine speech, all the panels notice, please time yourself and stop writing at 7:15. To continue the debate, I welcome the leader of opposition here.
Hi, can I check if I'm visible and audible?
Yeah, you both.
Okay, before I start my speech, just note that my team name in GGs means like our nationals for debate, okay? Because I'm gonna make some reference to it in my speech. Starting soon. Okay, maybe I don't get into JGs after pouring my blood, sweat, and tears into working towards that sole goal for the entirety of this year, blowing my money on debate comms. I'm humiliated when I face my club members and my coach, and my heart is shattered. I want to erase this memory, but maybe I don't, because this is irreversible. And later in my life, I realized that this was the critical turning point in my life, where I realized how much debate means to me, when I realized how much effort I actually have to pour in order to match the standards of other people around me. Maybe this is the turning point in which that I learned a valuable life lesson. But we think that humans are inherently gratified. They want to receive instant gratification, and they are going to want to erase their memories even without fully evaluating the situations. They are going to be self-obsessed, self-fulfilling, and overuse this technology, right? Firstly, then, some points of setup. I think that on the point of regulation and accessibility, we think that it's simply impossible and very unrealistic to restrict it to only medical professionals, right? Because they're going to think that it's infringing on their free will if it's only going to be accessible to the richer public. This is why these drug mules or like these black market workers are then going to access it and make it available through the black market. We see this empirically, right? Like drugs that give you immediate gratification and alleviation of stress. And the mechanism for this is because when there's such a high demand of this technology and every hospital is integrating it into their hospital system and healthcare operation, this means that these black market systems are going to then capitalize it and use it to profit off of it, right? Which is going to exploit the people who do rely on this technology. Before I move on to my two constructive arguments for today, I'm going to do some refutation for the opposition case. So note that they come to tell us that like they require the government, and they give us this really lengthy procedure about their ideal world where there's so much regulation about this, but recognize that these patients are likely to choose to undergo a procedure because the idea of erasing your mental health issues as a whole is so much more appealing than the idea of spending thousands of more dollars at a therapy clinic for the rest of their lives. And also because that's going to be very time consuming and they're going to have to like constantly relive this memory, they're more likely to want to tell their therapist immediately that they want this technology as of that problem, right? And this means that and also they talked about how it's going to be helping like people as a whole, but even if this is true, many people may still try to exaggerate the effects so as to obtain this technology, so that in seeing how like people pretended to have cough in order to obtain cough syrup, which then stimulated the drugs, right? Notice how like mental health effects are also highly subjective, and they don't have a concrete evidence as compared to physical health because it's innate. It's not something that you can like visibly display, and this exacerbates this likelihood of patients opting in for this technology and abusing it themselves. Note here then that proposition also came to tell us about how they're going to have like better psychological health, but we're willing to trade off the slight improvement in mental health from ownership for the long-term recovery and happiness from overcoming this mental health. Based on the sheer metric of impact, right? I don't think like feeling like you have ownership is going to make you that happy, but knowing that you overcame something so monumental is going to give you a lot of long-term satisfaction when you honestly like ruminate about it in the past, right? In the future. So first argument then on how people need this experience, it's integral to their identity, and you can keep it to start like moving forward in their lives, right? So note that here, when technology is so accessible, people are likely to overuse them. Why is this the case? Because society is built on a strong narrative that bad experiences are a burden. These individuals will be pressured into erasing memories because they don't want to seem like a masochistic anomaly and outcast. Their innate desires are going to be so invalidated by society as a whole. This is bad on many levels. Number one, these experiences allow you to have more wisdom, like I've already proved in my opening line. Experiencing something firsthand is so vastly different from being told about something. The reason why experiences provide much more impact on people and are enablers and catalysts of change change is because they're able to actually learn and make use of these guiding principles in their lives, which inevitably leave like a much bigger mark and impression of people. When they go through these things, they have their own raw, unique understandings towards these experiences and are forced to go through the effects of such experiences. But this then provides them with a long-term benefit of taking these experiences and using them as a reminder not to do certain things. Looks like how after you're like getting scammed of concert tickets, right? This is like traumatic for many, and you start being more aware of such scams as a whole, because this like memory leaves an enormous impact on your life. Government bench deprives people of this opportunity to learn their own mistakes and traps them in a vicious cycle of continuously making the wrong mistakes, because they then never get the chance to experience the true consequences of their actions, right? Secondly, then, on how it's an integral part of shaping your identity. The matter of the fact is that your experiences, whether good or bad, are always going to shape your identity. If you only recall all the good experiences that you derive a lot of pleasure from, there's never that bitterness or adversity to counterbalance it, to remind yourself of your hardships and what you learned from them. Maybe not getting what you want at times makes you realize and open your eyes about how badly you want it, how badly you yearn and pine for it, and then propels you to work even harder. That is simply not something that is accessible on side proposition. Thirdly, then, about how sometimes people are going to be way too quick to erase their memories, right? Because after all, they want to save themselves from this trauma. They want to alleviate this like immediate overwhelming like stress, right? But before I move on to the impacts of this argument, is there any POIs from closing? 1, 2, 3. However, recognize that as time passes, even if it's like for a year, some experiences can still turn into positive ones. For instance, as I'm making this speech, I'm literally so scared and I don't want to relive this and like ruminate about this, right? But in the future, when I look back, I'm going to smile at the thought that I've grown so much from this experience, even if I lose finals, and that's like heartbreaking, right? So the solution is then that on our side, we allow people to go through these hardships, learn from them, and become more wise in the face of similar challenges in the future. We allow for the building of identities. This is because many of the times when you go through hardship, you then have more empathy for the people around you and who share the similar experiences, right? That's precisely why on proposition side, many people are going to start invalidating mental illnesses when you can simply wipe out the like starting point of when your mental illness surface, right? They're going to start invalidating people's concerns about their own mental illness, and mental health awareness as a whole is going to decrease significantly. And also we think that just as an individual, when you learn from this experience, you're more likely able to share about it with your peers. They're more likely to be able to learn about it, and instead of sweeping the problem under the rug, there's going to be more discourse, there's going to be more cross-pollination of ideas and less stigmatization about mental health issues and certain problems that you face. This is so significant because in certain events, such as when like a victim is getting raped, they don't consent into this experience, right? But when they can then learn from this experience as a whole and grow stronger and share about it to other victims, they're more likely to pave the way for more empowerment and be the catalyst for change as society in a whole. Very proud to stand on opposition.
I think the speaker for the final speech. Now I welcome the PM here.
Okay, hi, am I audible and visible?
Yeah, you are.
Okay, my name is Yirui, my pronouns are she, her, and I would prefer my POIs to be verbal. And 1 second, sorry. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Judge, today in my speech, I will show you how this technology allows for the selective removal of painful memories, helping people to move past conflicts and heal emotional wounds that would have otherwise divide families, friendships, and communities. Now, as a victim of emotional trauma, I've never been prouder to propose. Now, in my case today, I'll first be going over some rebuttals, right? Now, I'll brought up the fact that there won't be regulation and there will be a massive black market for this technology, right? First, I just want to touch on our regulation framework. In our model, memory erasure is tightly regulated and accessible only through licensed medical professionals, similar to controlled substances like prescription medications or these advanced medical procedures like brain surgery, right? The use of memory erasure can be strictly monitored with stringent checks to ensure ethical use. We think that this already happens in the status quo, so I think it can happen in our world as well, right? And with these enforcement capabilities, governments already have mechanisms in place for monitoring monitoring controlled technologies and substances, from narcotics to genetic editing tools, the same enforcement mechanisms would apply here, minimizing the risk of widespread black market operations, advanced tracking, licensing of practitioners, and penalties for these unlicensed use, and can deter unauthorized practices effectively, right? And they also bring up this point on how overcoming something monumental will give you this satisfaction, right? This does not address traumatizing cases like rape, abuse. Opposition's case just hinges on the fact that there will be a massive black market and people will use it impulsively. However, they don't take into consideration that there are factors like the severity of trauma. While sure, it's true that some people find strength in overcoming challenges, this is not a universal experience, especially with severe trauma. For those with deeply traumatic experiences like war veterans or survivors of abuse, the process of overcoming trauma can be overwhelming most of the time, leading to years and years of suffering for no guaranteed resolution. And also, we need to touch on the fact that forced healing is in fact harmful. The opposition's approach assumes that everyone should try to overcome their trauma because it could be satisfying in the end. But forcing this path on everyone is both unrealistic and cruel. People have different needs and capacities, and it is unfair to expect all individuals to endure pain for the sake of potential satisfaction. We don't know if they're actually going to heal in the end or not. And even with satisfaction, right, it doesn't completely eliminate pain. There are different paths to growth, and growth and satisfaction can come from moving forward into new experiences rather than just like wrestling with past pain. By erasing specific painful memories, individuals can focus on building new positive memories and relationships, which can be as rewarding and fulfilling. No, thank you. And we need to touch on the fact that not everybody wants to carry this burden. Trauma is not an obligation. It's not something you have to work through in our world, right? The OP assumes that people should bear the burden of their traumatic experiences for potential character growth. But many trauma survivors simply want relief. They want to feel their traumatic experience. They feel that their traumatic experiences are holding them back rather than serving them as a source of strength. And this type of recovery should not be romanticized. The idea that overcoming trauma is inherently satisfying romanticizes the process and ignores the very real suffering that many endure without relief. Now, memory erasure offers a compassionate alternative that acknowledges the diversity of human experiences and the right to choose one's path to healing, right? And they also say that this validates a lot of mental health issues. Now, memory erasure is not presented as a replacement for understanding or treating mental illnesses, but as an additional tool for those who need it. It's specifically designed to address the root causes of trauma-related conditions such as PTSD, where specific memory is the main source of distress. Memory erasure is an acknowledgement that some memories are so painful that they fundamentally alter a person's ability to live a normal life. By offering this, it is a sign that society recognizes the depth of pain and provide an option that meets their needs in a way that other treatments might not. So moving on to my substantive on better social harmony here, right? So first, how does this happen? We say that selective removal of painful memories allows individuals to remove memories of specific events such as traumatic arguments, betrayals, or hurtful experiences, right? While preserving the rest of their life experiences and knowledge. This precision means people can choose to eliminate only those memories that are directly causing them distress or bitterness without affecting their overall sense of identity. And we've already set this up in our first speaker as well. For example, in cases of family conflicts or romantic relationships where a single traumatic event has caused long-term rifts, individuals can opt to forget that specific event, enabling them to interact without the lingering resentment or pain associated with that memory, right? And the ability to erase these memories diminishes the frequency and intensity of emotional triggers that would otherwise arise in social interactions. And now this can help reduce tension and prevent the reopening of just old wounds and pouring salt on the cut, making it easier for individuals to approach each other with a fresh perspective. And when people no longer have vivid recollections of hurtful memories, are more likely to engage in positive communication and are less prone to react defensively or aggressively in interactions. Now, memory erasure, it just acts as a catalyst in this case for forgiveness by removing the primary mental barriers that prevent people from letting go in the first place. With With removing these, individuals are more likely to approach situations with empathy and a willingness to build damaged relationships. So now, why does this even matter? The capacity to selectively forget painful events can lead to a more stronger, more stable social and familial bond, right? As it removes the lingering negative emotions that undermine these long-term relationships. Now, this contributes to more cohesive communities where people are less likely to hold grudges or remain isolated due to past grievances that these people have already learned the mistakes of and improved as like better people, right? For example, couples who have gone through a like really difficult patch in their relationship may use memory erasure to forget a particularly painful argument, allowing them to reconnect without the weight of that memory affecting their dynamics. And now on reduction in social conflict, right? On a broader societal level, we think that this technology can reduce social conflict that comes from these deep-rooted resentments, such as those directly related to fights, workplace tensions, or conflict within like our peer groups. A world with less resentment and fewer negative triggers certainly just creates a more harmonious society in general, as individuals are better able to move past their differences. And this can just overall contribute to greater social stability, making societies less polarized and more cooperative, as memory erasure allows people to focus on positive interactions other than being haunted by past encounters. Now, we're trying to create a culture of second chances, right? And this cultural shift can lead to more inclusive and empathetic communities where people are valued for their present actions rather than being forever judged by their worst moments, by their lowest. It creates an environment where reconciliation is seen as possible and desirable, leading to a more compassionate social environment. And for that, I've never been prouder to propose.
Speaker for the fine speech. Again, don't put in anything after 7:15. To close the class on opening half, welcome DOO here.
Hi, sorry, give me a sec. My bad. Yes. Wait, I assume I'm audible. Thank you. Before I start my speech, I just like to shout out my coach, Ian Dylan Chai. I'm really sorry if I disappoint you, but you're a great coach. Okay. I think that right now, I can tell you that even if it's true that back then I was hurt by multiple friendships of acts of betrayal that have been committed against me, even if I've sobbed over hours on end over that one guy who didn't like me back, I'm still grateful that I've gone through these experiences because it's taught me who to look out for. Like future decisions that I should take that I know will better benefit me. And it's precisely because that it's provided me with so much wisdom and knowledge, and this long-term like knowledge can actually influence me to make better decisions in the future with long-term change. We would definitely opt for a world where memory erasure is not a thing, right? But first thing that I want to address on OG's case is that I like to point out they have a major contradiction in their case. Their first speaker came up to talk to us about the idea on regulation and about how this is only limited to medical professionals and to people who have severe mental health issues like PTSD, right? However, their second speaker came up with the same stance at first, but spent the rest of their 5 minutes talking about how you can heal from like all the betrayals that you've had in your community, about how society can find peace within each other. But I don't think that that's something that everyone gets sent to therapy for, right? Because if you're telling me that a friendship breakup is something therapy worthy, I think that all of us would have been there by now. Now that I've already established this major contradiction, I'm still going to be charitable enough and deal with the rest of their case. Firstly, on the idea of social ties, the first thing they tell us is about there's going to be better social harmony because of the acts of betrayal. People can now get over this, right? But recognize that if I'm willing to put aside the major contradiction, notice that these acts are essential for learning about your own identity and making decisions on who you want to be friends with in the future. Recognize that betrayals, yes, they're horrible in the moment, right? Like you feel really bad in the short term, but they're essential for long-term development and growth as a person. And it's essential, and I think that we like to focus on the fact that this is literal betrayals. It's not something that's like, it's like something you see in your day-to-day life, right? It's not life-threatening. I think you should please emphasis on this idea and how it's very likely that 90% of society is able to overcome this and use this as a good reminder to look out for certain people within society in the future. Then next thing that I'd like to point out is that they came up with this idea of like how there's going to be a fresh impression of new people, and but recognize that it's unclear to us why that's actually a good thing, right? Because this means that you actually repeat the mistakes. You're going to repeatedly keep gravitating towards those wrong people that you did in the past because of the removal of such memories, right? And I like to talk about how, like, even if it's true where like your memories get repeated, the person themselves still remain the same. That means that if Yi Zenn has betrayed me multiple times in the past, but my memory has gotten erased and I get a fresh impression of her, that won't matter because in the future, she is still the same person who has betrayed me back then. She will continue to do the same thing to me in the future, and that's not going to be very good for me as a person. Government bench throws you into this vicious cycle, which doesn't allow you to grow as a person, makes you continue to repeat mistakes, and that's exactly what we oppose. So why do we actually achieve better social change on our comparative and outside house? This is because we force them to learn how to accept one another, recognize that in a world where people do not have access to this technology at all, and it's incredibly like non-existent, obviously maybe like to the people around them, maybe they don't have like My Little Pony perfect best friends forever friendships, right? But it's precisely because they can't like erase memories about them, and that they are which then results in them actually being so-called forced to work with them. And so therefore, they will find ways to actually overcome these so-called like arguments that they might have encountered with them in the past and learn to work with them in the future, which means that we essentially take down all their points on how we won't have any social change on our side. And we actually prove to you that we actually do this better in the future, right? And I also like to point out that on their side of the house, so now I'm just going to do like a direct comparison. On our side, we have long-term peace when people learn to get along with one another, but on their side, they have repeated conflicts because they have no time to learn how to accept one another, and their personalities remain the same. And I also like to say that it's much more likely that on their side of the house, people are going to continue to be the same as they were before because they don't actually get to have a shift in identities, right? Everything that you go through shapes you as a person. This competition that I'm going through right now, I'm going to use it as like in the future, maybe I'll probably change my speaking style to be a lot more chill, right? It shaped me as a person, and I think that that's essential to human lives, right? But now this then brings me on to my next point for this house today, on whether or not there's going to be regulation. Even if it's true that there are no black markets, recognize that doctors, which I think is actually incredibly untrue, right? Because like we've really seen so many black markets come out. And I also like to put emphasis on like this drug that Purdue University actually produced, and people went up to them lying about their symptoms just so they could obtain access to these drugs. I like the judge to keep this in mind, by the way. Even if it's true that there is no black market, recognize that doctors are still incredibly overworked. I want to draw a parallel to the criminal justice system about how it's not entirely foolproof, because sometimes lawyers are incredibly overworked and are likely to not like public defenders are incredibly overworked, not likely to defend their clients to the fullest extent. Therefore, I like to draw a parallel to these doctors, tell you how they work 80-hour work weeks, and thus are likely to be overworked and opt for the easier option of just simply providing these people with a straight-up memory erasure procedure, telling them it's the best thing possible, just so that they can save themselves time and resources. And lastly, secondly, victims may also not want to go through therapy and would much rather go through this so that they can save money. Recognize that for the vast majority of people in society, right, if you've characterized this to be such a lengthy procedure in order for them to like go through this whole like, oh, like, are you okay? What's your diagnosis? Entire procedure. It means it's probably likely to cost a whole lot more money than therapy, which then means that the vast majority of it's likely that this is only accessible for those who are like higher upper middle class, right? And these people, they want to save money, and so they are more likely to lie about or like exaggerate their symptoms so to allow them to actually undergo this procedure instead of trying to go through therapy, even if their symptoms aren't that bad. But the next thing I like to do is attack their framework on a deeper level, because I find it very funny how they're relying on the government that has failed us multiple times, and it's been supported with other mechanisms if you don't buy our previous ones. Like I said, therapists are overworked and they have a backlog of cases and talk to patients for hours on end. Humans are self-interested and also profit-driven. They're likely to exploit it and impose this onto their victims by deeming them suitable for prescription of this tech so they can still close their cases and earn their fair share. Maybe it's even worse when it's available to government systems, because many people are going to exploit their power and capital over this text, such as foreign spies, which can wipe the memories so that the problematic nature of these. But before I continue, yes, I'll take that POI.
If therapists are so profit-driven, I assume it's parallel on both sides of the house, then why on your side of the house wouldn't they perpetually make these victims come back and back to the therapy without actually providing any good feedback?
Actually, I would like to say that on our side of the house, victims are actually allowed to give their own insights to these therapists. Like, for example, in Singapore's Institute of Mental Health, they've implemented a survey section which actually requires every single patient to give their own insights as to how helpful each therapy session is. And if I'm not wrong, the salary is also determined by this. Now, moving on to the other points, which side is more fulfillment as a whole for the actor majority? They talk about they talk about themselves, because I like to add a preemptive point. Later onwards, government bench might be saying that like, oh, they won't be sad anymore, they'll be more happy because you don't have these bad memories. But recognize about your identity, your experience make up who you are, and it's unique to overcoming these challenges which give you satisfactions. Recognize that overcoming in itself is surviving through it. When you lay on your deathbed, I'm sure that even if you don't overcome this certain mental health issue, right, you'll still be proud about the fact that you've tried your best to live through it, and it gives you some form of satisfaction that you've actually survived through it instead of just opting for another way out. On all those grounds, OO takes this debate, and coach, please let us into JG's. So proud to oppose.
Thanks, DOO. Now to open the classroom on closing half, I welcome member of government here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Okay, give me a minute to arrange my speech. Okay, verbal POIs. Pronounce he, him. Time heals nothing. It only teaches you how to live with it. This is a problem that the minority of patients face, as opposition's bench deprive them from being able to access the tech that can solve the situation rather quickly and effective, where they can continue to live fulfilling life in the end compared to their world. The first tipping point that I want to deal with in this debate is the first on change of an individual, which directly deals with OO case. The context of framing towards this is simple. How this applies in our world is that these machines are more likely to be limited, where we can only find them in places like hospitals, where this in turn negates any arguments on how it may be misused or treated like some expensive luxury, because that will rely on the premise that this advanced technology is somehow accessible to everyone. This is true because it's a medical procedure and medically safe from the motion and needs to be operated by a professionals in that sense, where it is only then we support a world where it is medically safe, but not those who comes from black market instead, where it's only through actual appointments in hospitals. Who is it likely to have it? We differentiate from OG because instead of talking about healing people from normal things like breakout, we instead support people who actually went through things like traumatic experiences and therefore have been mentally or physically affected to the point where certain day-to-day activities becomes much harder to do, to use it instead, where it includes things like those with personal trauma where it looks like rape or child abuse, and soldiers who have PTSD because of the war, and where this is obviously assessed by professionals and only prescribed as a last resort when these individuals are unable to cope with it despite therapy, where oftentimes these professionals only use it as a last resort when they see it actually there's like a need for this patient to use it in the first place. This is important because it directly deals with the OO case about how people is going to misuse it, while showing that it's often time limited then. Our modern stance is simple because firstly, we push for a world that people are able to access the memory erasure technology only in the form of having a medical or therapy from prescription from professionals that they should use the memory erasure technology insofar as they are actively hurt from these traumatic experiences and have been certified from professionals that's the best to remove them for the benefits of the patient. Secondly, we also support a world where this tech is often used as a means to create an alternative to people who are not able to cope with their traumatic experience as well, which is good because there's a limited amount of alternative for them to do so in status quo. Odd bench has to show why that comparative is better. What is the problem with opposition's bench then? It's firstly, people aren't able to find real closure from the experience like OO say, because patient from these cases that we are talking about is extreme, where these those extremely traumatic experience most likely couldn't find any closure from it in the first place, because in most of these cases, right, the intensity of trauma is so overwhelming for the minority of people who faces these traumatic experiences, where the traditional methods of healing such as therapy, maybe support system or self-reflection are oftentimes insufficient to fully address it in status quo. But this is true because for some victims of abuse where war or severe loss, the pain can also be so deep-rooted that closure may remain elusive even after years of processing it, right? But this only means that it links to how it is going to affect your everyday life, which is incredibly impactful to someone then. This is bad Because even if they might say that mistakes and experience shapes who you are, we say that even if experience shapes who you are as a person, right? But this experience already actively harms you in your daily lives, whether it's not really shaping who you are in the future, it's slowly destroying you in the long run as you are slowly rot under the traumatic experiences that they feel to address. This is important because it deals with OO rhetoric on how people can get good experience from this traumatic experience then. Unlike normal traditional methods to deal with these traumatic experiences, where it looks like PTSD, as we see a limited success of current method being able to deal with it, right? Which is bad because you leave no choice for these patients to avoid and push away this trauma. They have to suffer with it in your world. So even if it does, right, it takes such a long time for you to heal from it in the first place. So benefits very marginal, but even if it's good, right, at least the doctors prescribe it to show that there's a level of intensity that they should opt into it in the first place. What did OO push to you? Firstly, is there is going to be discussed in the status quo already, so it's okay. Gut check, is it really true? Because there's very less attention about it, but teenagers don't really know how to solve the issue. Especially for those who have these specific cases, there's no real safe space for them to actually find help from professionals with these technologies, right? This is true because they often already are overlooked, where teenagers who experience extreme trauma often fall through the cracks of the social and healthcare system, where these specific cases require specialized attention, but because of this trauma in teenagers, it's frequently oftentimes downplayed or misunderstood by the society. They often don't get the help that they need. But society also tends to focus on broader issues like things like education, family problems, or substance abuse amongst teens, but extreme cases of traumatic experiences aren't given enough attention. If it was true, please give analysis on it in CO. But even if they do, we create a better and more meaningful discourse with this tech when more and more people are likely to then talk about these cases then. Secondly, about vicious mistakes. We are okay with having mistakes, but what we say is that these traumatic experiences will most likely come since young, which most likely means that you are unable to avoid them in the long run. But the difference is what they do is how they grow old to actually solve this in both worlds. Because they will have to face this in the long run. They didn't deal with it, so the impact still applies. The comparative then on our world is firstly we are able to get meaningful discourse and engagement which we flip on OO's world, where this increases more discourse in society about tech, where it's more likely going to be widely known throughout the country, which is good because now this raises more awareness about the cases like this, which flips OO entire case about how people can find safe spaces in their world. But before 6 PY.
Would you prefer a world where mental disorders was simply invalidated and did not exist as a whole?
There is cases where these cases still can exist, but the point in which it actively harms the person to that severity, that is the point where this tech should be used. Secondly, about how on our case, we are able to find more fulfillment in life, right? Where you're more likely to find solace for the people on the ground, where they're able to stray away from their past and then shape a new future for yourself without the large mental scar that was in fact inflicted to you when you grew up as an individual who was abused, where only then genuine change really happens. Because now we allow people to actually have the ability to change when they can be put free from the traumatic experience, which is really hard to get out from. This is important because we directly deal with and prove how our comparative deals with OO case in a better way. CO, good luck.
I think the speaker for the fine speech has opened a case for CO. I will get a member of opposition here.
Just check. Am I audible and visible?
Yeah, you're both.
Thank you. So, your eyes verbally pronounce him, and shout out to my coach Gelson. Okay. Starting in 3, 2, 1. OG and OO have relied on the very individualized aspects of the technology, but those impacts rely on individual behavior and choice, which are highly speculative and circumstantial. On CO, we'll give you broader societal development impacts as a result of the technology, but how therapeutic growth has been stunted, or how this would harm the rise of social movements, and how dictators and oppressive governments would use this against individuals. But before that, a few points of framing. First things, what does this technology not affect? Material harms can still exist on proposition. And also, people will use substances on proposition also, because those things happen in the movement. like before you go through 10 stages of therapy, you still drink alcohol, you still take drugs, you still smoke. So largely those harms will still exist on your side as a coping mechanism, right? But also, I think OG and CG work under a very soft model, but we'll engage with this model. It just means that the extent of the benefits they can claim are severely limited, but the societal implications of this technology still exist. First extension then on how this technology would have stunted the rise of therapy and human understanding. OG is correct in pointing out that therapies aren't as bad as OO says, but we think the existence of this technology will make therapeutic care worse. The institutions of therapy exist right now because there are no alternatives and there is a demand for it. People pay and subsidize therapeutic care, but also therapeutic research. On propositions world, most individuals would have opted to use this technology because they perceive this as the better thing to do and is a more immediate thing, because individuals are naturally hedonistic and seek the simplest path to resolve their problems rather than the long-term path to resolve their problems. Therapy then is better than technology because modern forms of therapy like CBT exist and have been proven to solve the worst forms of trauma that even CG tried to claim for their side, right? This therapy is also getting better and more accessible as time goes on. And insofar as proposition has some fiat to say this erasure tech is accessible, we think this debate has to operate on symmetric accessibility. Therapy then not only allows you to resolve the underlying problem behind your PTSD, but also teaches you how to deal with the problem that caused you to have bad emotions, preventing you from making the same mistake in the future, right? The weighing then is clear. On proposition, you might be able to get rid of the emotional distress, but you'll still have the material cost of the memories. People who constantly ate instant noodles and unhealthy energy drinks during exam season, they might be able to forget those things, but they will not remember the harm of eating those bad things to their health, and therefore repeat those actions that result in a worse health for them down the line. This can be extrapolated into worse things like drugs and smoking, right? Erasing it means you have that harm to your health, but you're also likely to repeat those actions because you can't remember the guilt you felt in that moment or why the specific thing you did to cope was bad. You're likely to result to worse forms of coping mechanisms on your side of the house, especially since there's a large gap between actually getting your memories erased and still experiencing those memories, right? This proves the benefits that OG push are inexclusive and are achieved better on our side of the house. Even the worst forms of harm like PTSD experience can be resolved. But even if we operate on proposition's best case, we think the rise of therapeutic care in of itself has been a good to society, and this is an exclusive benefit to our side of the house. The demand for mental care has led to investment into human understanding. We know why people get addicted to certain things. We understand mental health problems better. This was only exclusive to our side of the house because there is a visceral demand for these things. When you have a patient, or when you have individuals and a group of individuals in society that cannot forget the bad things, the previous bad memories that happened to them, that acts as a driving mechanism that encourages you to invest into better understanding of human emotions and thinking, right? This is even more important because some mental health conditions cannot be erased, like having a bipolar disorder or having chronic depression. On your side of the house, memories of how you've navigated certain depressive episodes before ensure you're able to navigate it better in the future. On proposition, sure, you might not remember the bad memories of your mood swings before, but because you can't remember how you deal with bad memories, you're likely to overreact in particularly visceral episodes in the future and engage in things like self-harm or even worse and more permanent things. These things harm your health and leave you with actual scars. On outside of the house, because you have a long memory of how you've been able to deal with these things in the past, you now are able to mitigate the worst forms of it happening in the future, right? On proposition, when this is what therapy is administered to you at the end, the problem you're experiencing is considered to be solved, so there's no demand for more advanced therapeutic care. CJ says this will primarily help soldiers suffering from PTSD, right? I want to take this down also. The type of PTSD that Prop talk about usually are experienced by war victims or victims of sexual assault. Let's be clear. The best way to solve these things is to prevent it from happening in the first place, not to provide some small form of reconciliation to the emotional harm of war acts as a significant war is able to tell why it was so bad and use their experiences to explain why it was so bad and immoral. Because of this, there's been an increase in awareness regarding the harms of war and the rise in more main methods of warfare, like the Geneva Convention or like the banning of certain torture methods. So only on our side of the house is that the stigmatization of war and conflict due to the emotional impact and stories these survivors can tell because they can't forget those stories, and their response is to put those stories out there because they don't want other people to go through these things. Before I move on, I'll take a POI.
If people are willing to relive their experiences and tell these stories, they would do the same thing on our side of the house.
No, because on your side of the house, the people immediately opt for therapeutic care. Our side, it isn't even contingent on people letting these out. You can simply show that individuals are experiencing emotional distress due to interviews or certain things, and that can be extrapolated into the larger impact of warfare. On your side, the narrative that gets played into society is that, oh, there's already a solution for this. Second extension then, on how this will be used against social progress. Proposition can fiat that technology will exist, but they can't fiat that it won't be misused by certain actors. They can model the ideal implementation of the policy, but they have to prove why states would be on board with that. We think first, Conversely, the use of this technology would have majorly stunted social movements that sought out reforms. Social movements and their success rely on visceral human experiences and memories that prove that the status quo is not viable and you need to stand up against oppression. How? Individuals who have gone through bad things can have empathy to have towards other individuals and towards certain social issues. We differentiate from OO here because even if they haven't gone through the same discrimination, because they've had bad experiences in general, they will be able to relate to victims and survivors and are therefore more likely to have a stronger support for social movements and other victims and survivors. On proposition, there's no urgency. There's no like social change is slow on your side of the house. But also, we think oppressive governments would misuse this heavily on your side of the house. These governments, like the Chinese Communist Party in the past, that has adopted severe forms of propagandizing and brainwashing its citizens, or African dictatorships that exert brute force on their populace. Why is this likely? Because oppressive governments have state control over healthcare and therapeutic institutions. Their only incentive is to maintain and cling on to power. This technology can not only be misused by them, but can also be framed as something that is justified because, oh, it can be branded as the ideal choice of happiness. And secondly, so oppressive governments don't even have to like get backlash for using this technology because society on their side of the house accepts it. Why is this the most important harm in the debate then? We think the extent of harm is that oppressive governments are constantly able to cling to power and hold on to power. This means the mass suffering of individuals will continue to happen, where governments can exert forced labor on individuals, and individuals who will be forced or tricked into like using this technology will not be able to remember the severest form of harm, so they'll be stuck in a cycle of oppression because you don't meet the minimum emotional threshold to revolt against the government or to have a collective mass of individuals that have the same harmful memories to revolt against the individuals. For all those reasons, our side is the only side that provides you actual impacts that affect everyone in this house. We win the debate.
I thank the speaker for the fine speech. Now to close the case for the government bench, I welcome the government whip here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
That's great. Okay, just wait, hold on. Pronouns he, him, and I will ask for the POI, verbal POI. I will ask for it, then yeah, just like that. I'll start my speech on my first word, yeah? There is a limit to everything, and when you exceed that limit, everything breaks down. Panel, I'm going to first go over the rebuttal that I have for closing opposition. Then I'm going to go over to the opening opposition and just destroy them even more. Then, first thing for CEO, I'm going to talk about what they said about how material harm exists where substances are used for coping. Sure, even if there were things like drugs and alcohols that are used to cope with their traumatic experiences, on our side, we still do it better because especially in those extreme cases of depression, which are caused by extreme traumatic experiences, we can use and access this tech as a means to stop the vicious cycle of abusing drugs and alcohol in the first place, which is better on our world, but in your world, people will be stuck under the cycle where people will continuously go through this coping mechanism and they'll never actually get out of the rut that they are in. Secondly, then, at least we gain the benefit in our world, but the thing is, you still worsen the situation in your world and there's no actual solvency on your side. Then, they talked about how they deal with memories of the past traumatic experiences. These traumatic experiences have a certain threshold. We can trade it off, panel, that perhaps they can get through it in the long run like how they propose, right? But the thing is, we say that the entire idea that the recovery will even be smooth in the first place, let alone manifest in the next place, which is more unlikely than true. And therefore, they lose out on the solvency and we take it at that point. Then we can also fiat that people will abuse it. That's what they said. But the thing is, yeah, they can do it. But because it's based on the motion, we only support the tech if it is medically safe. So that takes down their random call out on their world, which doesn't really stand at all. And then they also talked about how there's brainwashing and talked about how the certain governments would use this as a method to brainwash propaganda. There's more likely to have regulation when they're even starting to implement this in the first place. But even if they do more likely for other countries and people on the ground to call out their vicious acts, which is disincentivizing because people distrust the government. Government image and optic will become incredibly bad, and therefore the idea and chance for brainwash to even happen in the first place is extremely unlawful and extremely unlikely and unplausible on their side. So we take down CEO from that point. Now, to go over to opening opposition then, there's a few rebuttal and call-outs we have to go over. First, they talked about how in their world, there'll be people who learn valuable life lessons, and it's a very altruistic outlook, right? So First off, side opening opposition focuses on the trials and tribulations and would rather somehow trade off the larger demographic of individuals that have gone through certain traumatic experiences, right? This is very unrealistic and they're debating in an echo chamber of humiliation and trials and tribulations and only focusing on the less extreme cases when certain individuals have certain mental illnesses. The difference is simple, panel. One, a trial or tough time is going to have multiple people there for you to support you more than a traumatic experiences. And two, the traumatic experiences in fact reshape the fundamental identity of an individual. Why is this true? Three layers. Firstly, the individual has gone through certain traumatic experiences and received no closure to the situation. This looks like where rape victims do not get justice and have no one to talk to about it, about the situation that has happened to them. Secondly, then, a trauma-induced people also have the constant questioning and reminder at the back of their mind, asking if it was their fault that the trauma has happened to them. Third layer, then, is this creates a crippling cycle where these individuals feel so much negative emotions that they can only cope by turning to, at best, smoking and drinking or even drugs, and at worst, suicide. They also talked about how there's a black market that will exist in the world where this technology exists. I would say, first of all, it's quite a big assertion that doesn't really have too much deep analysis, and I'll show you why. They talked about how there's a high demand and unlikely that people will want to go to these black markets in the first place, right? That's what we want to say, right? So first of all, there's no deep analysis on why and how this would even happen in the first place, literally, because the technology is more than likely very complex, and it's not something as simple as the drug smuggling industry, such as weed plantations and cooking meth at the back of your garage. Why is it unlikely then that these black markets will even come to fruition in the first place? Firstly, the accessibility to people is limited in the sense that individuals can't just fake certain memories, and because it is internal within them, it is within their mind and can be measured with certain technologies such as lie detectors and can be observed by the therapist, right? Which is like you can see the physical manifestations of these individuals based on certain stimuluses. Secondly, then, even if in our worst case, in their best world of their argument saying that this does happen and there is a black market, first thing, people wouldn't want to even go to a black market where there's no medical professional for something so serious like erasing your memory, right? Secondly, then, the likelihood that it can even be sustained in the first place before there is a actual legal action taken is very, very low, and therefore it cannot even stand on the capacity for it to happen. But even if we take it at their best, panel, we actually still reap the benefits on our side, because at the end of it, these people who apparently really don't want to go to and do this procedure in an actual professional setting and want to get it done privately, they still get the benefit of the technology if it were to exist, because we're debating on whether or not the world would be better with this technology. And therefore, these people who go for this to this good-willed owners of this technology still able to get the benefits of the technology, and therefore their case can't stand. Now, before I go any further to the comparatives, POI.
Why would people invest in more advanced forms of therapeutic care that can help people with permanent mental problems when they can have this option at the end of every therapeutic center?
There is no actual chance for this therapies to even be able to solve certain illnesses that are so crippling and so permanent, like how you are proposing. And in the situation that they do, they are able to solve it. At the end of the day, we are able to provide a more a better technology, a better solution to this situation, where they are able to actually have 100% solvency to the issue and the traumatic experience that they've gone through, which is why my first speaker talked about the certain situations where this technology is actually used, such as the fact that there'll be people who've gone through war, people who've gone through traumatic experiences that are so severe to the point where they cannot even function properly on a day-to-day experience. Now, quickly to go into the comparatives of CG against them, is that we may not be able to provide the safe spaces that apparently other sites may have because of these sensitive issues. But the thing is, these vulnerable people will be able to allow these people to actually finally get some catharsis to the traumatic experience that these people have gone through. Secondly, these individuals are able to actually function properly on a doing their day-to-day activities without constantly going through the anxiety attacks and sudden panic attacks because of certain stimulus. And then on top of that, our world has a larger quote-unquote technological safe space, or rather last resort solution to the issues that these people have gone through and have no safe space or friends to talk about. The tipping point, panel, then at the end of it, is that we've dealt directly with both opposition benches, and on that, we are able to prove why people are more likely to find genuine resolution from traumatic experiences that they couldn't resolve in opposition's world, which is important because we directly solve and help the most vulnerable stakeholders in today's debate. We are able to bring out the important and bring more contribution to the delta of this debate, because this directly deals with both opposition benches cases on how the people will make mistakes, But our framing that these experiences destroy you instead of shaping you is crucial because it shows that there is no real good to have it in the first place, and also it'll be most likely bad because these people will go through get doctor prescription as well, right? We win this clash and we take this debate. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for the fine speech. Now to close the whole debate, I welcome the opposition whip here.
Am I audible and visible?
Yep.
Humans are terrible at making decisions. We do drugs and alcohol because it makes us feel better. Government takes advantage of a flawed human trait and allows individuals to opt for the easy way out and chip every part of what makes them human away. 3 clashes in your speech. Firstly, on therapy versus technology. Second, on how this affects people's lives. And lastly, our extension on societal harms. But before that, let me just deal with CG. They were mostly derivative about OG because they just ran the same thing about forgetting trauma. But there are 2 unique extensions. Firstly, that people will be misunderstood and they will fall through the cracks and therefore they don't get the help they need. This is symmetric. Supposedly, your technology is still locked behind so much bureaucracy and it's still under the control of doctors. This means people that are misunderstood will still be misunderstood on their side of the house. But secondly, the push about discourse happens and this is good. But firstly, I don't see why this is exclusive. I think discourse happens far more on our side because people know that mental health is endemic. This is a very, very big issue and therefore we ought to take care of the children and the youth. But secondly, urgency is highlighted on our side because there's a greater push for discourse because people know that it's hard to deal with trauma and the solution isn't as easy as just flicking a switch and erasing your memory. But secondly, Arjun told you that because mental health is seen as so much more important, there's a greater push for preventing bad experiences in the first place. That is to say, the awareness of PTSD led to the stop of the Vietnam War. What is the conclusion then? I think on our side, we were able to prove there's a greater societal push to prevent people from getting into bad situations in the first place. This is analytically prior to anything else, because insofar as we're able to stop trauma from happening in the first place, this is the best outcome because we stop trauma from happening in the first place, right? Next thing I want to do is taking down OG and CG's model about therapy versus technology. I think their model of the technology being locked behind therapy is incredibly problematic because this means you still lock it away to the people that can only afford 10 therapy sessions in the first place. But I want to note, these are the people that will probably go to therapy on our side of the house anyway, and therefore they can also get rid of trauma on our side of the house. Therefore, I don't see the delta in their case. But even if this was true, I think what people are likely to do is not try to recover at all during the first 10 therapy sessions in order to access the technology straight away because it's societally known to be magic. It's societally known to be immediate relief. Therefore, people will opt into that because this is important because this means on their side of the house, people don't actually deal with the problems as well. They will just fake it and because they don't want to engage with their problems and they don't want to do the hard work because they will just want to default to the easier erasure. This is important because we charitably engage with OG's model and we already outweigh OO because we don't have to prove the high burden of the emergence of black markets because our case isn't contingent on the characterization battle of whether people will bypass this or not or whether the criminal justice is inaccurate. We tell you that people will just opt for it anyway and fake and not try to deal with their problems during the first 10 therapy sessions. Why is the counterfactual then important on our side? Our counterfactual, we told you from Arjun, there was only therapy and this didn't get engaged with. Firstly, the norms and societal trend is already heading towards therapy and talking it out about not bottling your issues. Now, no, this is getting cheaper and more accessible over time because the supply of therapists increase insofar as there's greater awareness on the intensity and the problems of mental health. But secondly, because there is no alternative, people who feel pain will be implicitly forced to go to therapy anyway because of greater societal trends. This is great, but thirdly, this is important because we achieve the same end outcomes that people are no longer traumatized, but the process is far better because we make individuals go through the process of learning and untangling their trauma. Think about how it affects them and dissect their past and learn more about what happened. But lastly, the learning process in and of itself is valuable because what it does is it equips them with the skills to do it themselves in the future. You allow themselves to interact with their own past and learn about themselves in the meantime. Because if someone supposedly gets traumatized again in the future, we are better because we allow them to get equipped with the skills to deal with that trauma. Your side of the house forces them to go through government bureaucracy, to go through 3 months of not trying in therapy and using substances in the meantime. We equip them with the skills to deal with them by themselves if anything happens. But by proving this comparative, we already outweigh OO because we're providing actual counterfactual and how people deal with problems on our side of the house. This is important because this is a prerequisite to all of their benefits of self-empowerment and learning about your mistakes because people just don't get over it with a snap of their fingers. They still have to go through the hard work and we prove why this was more accessible on our side of the house. Next question on how this actually affects your current life. I think the main push we get from government is that your trauma will arise at any moment, and therefore this affects your ability to build new positive experiences. I think firstly, this is contingent on people not healing, but insofar as we already proved our comparative, this doesn't happen on our side because people still want to heal at the end of the day, but they do it through a much better mechanism. But secondly, I want to flip this. Positive experiences mean nothing on your side of the house because remembering bad experiences is the thing that makes happy memories and happy experiences now much more valuable because people benchmark their present levels of happiness relative to their past experiences. I'll give you an intuition pump. There is a reason why nobody wants to opt into a life full of just happiness and no sorrow, because this life is innately more monotone and innately more meaningless. For example, if someone finally breaks at the tournament after losing 10 tournaments in a row, this becomes much more meaningful to them insofar as they remember the previous bad experiences in the past. What is the weighing then? I think firstly, the reason why we outweigh OO is because we prove that even on government's best case and they get rid of trauma, this affects how people live in the long term. This affects how they get happiness in the long term. But this is also analytically prior, because insofar as everybody in this debate acknowledges that the happiness is the ultimate end goal for everything and is the best benefit, government stifles this from happening in the first place because the happiness on their side is innately more meaningless and not good at all. Before I move on, I'll take your point.
Yeah, the delta of the debate is which world brings more protection to people who have extreme trauma when just going to therapy tells you how to live with it. You didn't touch on this. How does your world solve this at all?
Firstly, there's already greater demand. There's already societal trends. I think we expand on that already. But secondly, because it's not as easy to deal with trauma with just a flick of a switch, there's greater discourse and push to make people opt into therapy. I think you just missed that from our speech. What is our extension then on societal harms? This was incredibly important because this broke the deadlock. Because if on both sides of the house, like healing is not really that important, we told you there's a unique harm on their side of the house by allowing technology to be used. We gave you two mechanisms from Arjun. Firstly, that oppressive governments are likely to crack down on political dissidents and use this to shift attention away from problematic events in the past because they have an incentive to hold on to power, but now they have also the capacity because they are the ones with control over the technology. But secondly, this clamps on the creation of social movements because the biggest motivator is when people feel wrong when they have trauma in the past. For example, the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement was due to the unforgivable act of killing George Floyd. What are the impacts and weighing then? Firstly, our extension isn't contingent on us beating oppressive government on our side, but we ought not take away the experiences of people because this is part of who they are. This is an extension of themselves and therefore they have self-ownership over these experiences. But secondly, our extension isn't a contingent on social movement succeeding. We don't really care about that, but it's the collectivization. It's the act that people unite and collectivize against an oppressive structure and they work towards the fight towards that. This is cathartic and empowering in and of itself. But the impacts of this is far greater because you allow governments on their side to rip and steal the important experiences of people. Even if this only happens in some oppressive countries, the depth of impact ought to outweigh anything else in this debate. We had three paths to victory in this debate. Firstly, we actually mechanize how therapy solves things. Therefore, this is a prerequisite to OO's benefits. But secondly, we flip OG's case and we proved how every single happy moment loses value on their side. So even if they get rid of traumatic behavior, their life is meaningless and not happy at all. But lastly, on a macro societal level, we give you enormous and big harm for vulnerable individuals in oppressive and suppressive countries. For all those reasons, CO.
All right, that concludes the debate. I thank everyone for what it was a really wonderful debate. So now me and the panel is gonna move to the breakout room to deliberate, and then afterward we're gonna announce the result in the closing ceremony. So thanks everyone. Please have a good break since then. All right, panels. I think we're gonna join room number 1. That's fine, you guys.